All right, we are recording. Hi, my name is Patrick, and I'm with RacketStringTips.com. And today we have a guest, Brad. He's from New York, and we've just been recently communicating via my YouTube channel, actually. And we just started talking about tennis, about professional stringing, and he was sharing about his experiences, being a hitting partner, and just how recently he got his certification for stringing. And really, the interesting thing is, we're this is like the first time that we've used StreamYard, so it's going to be kind of fun just to kind of have some dialogue and just talk about stringing, and that's kind of what Racket Stringing Tips is about. Just getting together with other uh, tennis geeks, I guess, and kind of just talk about tennis and talk about what our interests and our experiences, and hopefully that will inspire other people to get into this field and just kind of enhance their knowledge and so yeah, let's just go with that. Brad, thanks for joining me today, all the way from New York. I think we're kind of in separate parts of the. I'm all the way 2,500 miles in the ocean in Hawaii, and you're all the way in New York. So hey, we made this work. So thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to chatting with you about just some of our experiences, which it's possible we've even met in the past. I know that you were stringing at some tournaments that I was a hitting partner at, so it's kind of funny. 20 years later, here we are.
I know, right? It's like it's hard to get that stringing out of your blood sometimes. There's been a time, I took about 4 or 5 years where I kind of got away from stringing and tennis, and just with tennis elbow and other things I've had, uh, I think from stringing, I think,
Right.
um, but so it's one of those things that kind of keeps pulling you back and stuff. And so it was fun when you reached out, and just I don't know how we started it, but I think you were just had some input as one of my videos, and then we started talking and found out we knew some of the same people, and just some of those same circles. So it was kind of fun to see that. But I know that you had shared that initially, or when you first started, you didn't really like stringing. I mean, stringing wasn't something that you sought out to, hey, I'm going to be a racket stringer. It just was kind of out of necessity, perhaps, and maybe it was painful for you the first few years because it wasn't enjoyable. It was kind of like, oh man, I got to string some rackets. But now I understand that you recently got your master racket technician certification, which of course is going to help you with your local clientele and stuff like that. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, well, it's been a long road. Probably, I'm 48 now, so probably when I was 13 or 14, my father bought I guess maybe whatever the $100 stringing machine was back in 1985. I had a brother who was 2 years older, and my father was hardworking. And how can we save a little money when we can save money? And it was through stringing our own rackets. So we learned how to string rackets. I was using Prince synthetic gut string. And eventually it started breaking pretty frequently, but you could get it for $2 a set. So it was fairly inexpensive to string. And one of the reasons I didn't like it is, part of it is I just didn't have a lot of time being in school and then playing tennis, and it would take me an hour and a half to string a racket. But I did it. I'd string mine, sometimes my brother's, my father's. And as I got older, I started stringing for a few other people here and there, making a few extra dollars. And then fast forward to when I was 20 or so and started playing some of the satellite tournaments in 1996. I would actually put my Echelon machine, which was a hand crank. It had a base, and I'd separate the base, which was just really the foot stand, and throw it in the back of my Volkswagen and drive out to California. And I would end up being a stringer for a lot of the players. You may remember, like Jan Michael Gamble was playing these tournaments, Cecil Mamet, Doug Flack, Mark Merklin, Kevin Arias, Martin Blackman, a lot of good players. But I would, string for some of these guys. And so on top of playing the tournaments, I'd make a little extra money. I still didn't love stringing, but I also didn't love having no money. So I would string to make a few extra dollars. Eventually I stopped stringing and started becoming a hitting partner. I had a few ATP points in 1996 and 97 in singles and doubles. But it was just a struggle. I had a shoulder injury, and if I won one or two matches, my arm was pretty much dead for the third match. So as luck would have it for me, I had a friend who worked at a management company called Advantage International, and he was able to put me in touch with the lady in charge of the tennis players, and they represented, I remember, like Steffi Graf amongst a few others, but they were looking for a hitting partner for Jana Novotna. And so within a few days of contacting this lady at Advantage International, I was down in Boca Raton interviewing with Jana Novotna, and she ended up hiring me, and I spent about a year with her, practicing in Florida with her, going to maybe 8 or 9 tournaments with her. And then after a year with Nabotna, I got a job with Venus and Serena for about 3 years. And again, I would still string during this time, some of the time. Of course, if we were at a tournament, I was able to use the racket stringers. At the time, Jay Schweid, who did a lot of the he did the U.S. Open. He had the contract at the U.S. Open, and then some of the smaller tournaments, whoever was there would string my rackets. But when I was at Venus and Serena's house, they had a stringing machine on their patio, their screened-in porch, and so whenever I broke a string, I was able to string at their house.
I'm sure Richard was probably the one stringing the rackets, huh? Because
he may have been. I think I strung a few for the girls, but I don't remember who strung theirs. But I do remember still at the time, still not loving stringing and not paying much attention to anything other than I better just look at the pattern, cut it out, and then find the open holes. It wasn't till much later, and like you, after I kind of stopped hitting with Venus and Serena in 2001, I just kind of was a little bit tired of tennis, and I took about 7-8 years off where I didn't really pay attention to tennis. I didn't go to a tennis club. I didn't really do anything related to tennis until I had kids. And then as my kids started getting to the point where they could walk and run a little bit, I wanted to introduce them to tennis. And then eventually I wanted to introduce them to stringing, which is when I realized, well, maybe, even though I know how to string, maybe I should check out the United States Racket Stringers Association and see, maybe learn the right way. I'm sure there's some things that I don't know. So if I'm going to teach my kids, let me see about getting certified, which is what led me to getting my Master Racket Technician certification, just so I could teach my kids properly how to string.
Did they have, so as far as the Master Racket Technician, did they have like a place locally where you were able to get your certification? Because I know you have to reach out to, when you become certified, there has to be somebody that certifies you. So you need to, go on their website and find out somebody who's local that can connect you or meet with you, somebody who's like a certified certifier.
Right. Yeah, that was one of the big reasons that I did it. There was a guy in my hometown who probably lived 5 miles from me who I didn't know. And he was the certifier for the entire state of New York, and he lived 5 miles from me. And I contacted him, and he said, well, you better start studying, and you better study hard and quick, because I'm moving to Florida in about 6 weeks. So you can imagine, I just, you would think it would be an easy test. At least I was naive enough to think it would be an easy test. I've been around tennis my whole life, and at this point I'd strung probably 3,000-4,000 rackets. But there's a lot to the test, and it was really good for me being out of school for so long to really have to, just kind of buckle down and study hard. There's a lot of memorization, and there's a lot to it. And now that I passed, I really enjoy stringing, and I enjoy the process. And there's a lot of respect now that I have for the professional stringers like yourself who did this on tour, because there's a lot more to it than just cutting out the strings, throwing it on the machine and restringing it. There's a lot that goes into it. So I'm really happy to be kind of part of the stringing community now.
And part of that MRT too, you had to do a lot of hands-on. You had to build up a grip the right way. You had to replace grommet sets or a grommet set, and which you think, oh yeah, I can replace a grommet set, but if you haven't done a lot of them, and then you have to do it under pressure where you're being timed or you're being watched, and and then trying to get it on there, and then you have to string a racket with it, I think, with the new grommets on there or something, and that's a whole other thing, getting the seat right. And for somebody who hasn't done that a lot, it could be challenging, right? And so
Sure, sure. The stringing was pretty easy, but again, you also with stringing, you have to pay attention that you're not kinking the strings, you're not missing a weave, you're not like I don't know if it was you that might have said it's really important you pay attention to the outside of the racket too when you're stringing. I think that was you, and that's 100%. It's like
yeah.
so.
It's just crossovers, because when you're stringing a racket and you're starting and then you're like going, you've got a rhythm going, you don't always pay attention to every little minute detail, right? But when you're
Right.
eventually it becomes automatic, and then you don't even think about it, and your memory takes over and you don't even have to worry about it. It's like driving a car, right? Sometimes you get to a destination, you don't even remember that you got in your
Right.
car, or the time between getting in the car and getting there. So I mean, that's the whole thing. But the thing that I always saw a lot of problems with is when people just didn't pay attention to how the strings cross over each other naturally on the outside, right? Because
Yeah.
sometimes when they're seated, right, that when the grommets, I mean, if it's a brand new racket, it's usually not that big of an issue. But if it's one that's been strung tons of times and it's seated differently from different patterns and different strings being pulled through there, it tends to like create like places where if you don't pay attention, you could easily cross over in the string, and that just looks sloppy, and it could cause premature breakage if those strings touch the ground, or
Right.
we know sometimes that always that happens quite a lot, especially in the head guard, right? Because
Yeah.
sometimes you tie off, and that's the thing too with professional stringing. A lot of times the goal is, when you're stringing a racket, is not to have a large piece of string anywhere around the frame, because when you're tying off, if the hole that you're, the last cross cross that you pulled through, and then you have to tie it off on a hole that's maybe 3 holes up, because that's the natural place that it's recommended to tie off on, but it leaves like that much string on the outside. Usually you would find in sometimes in different tournaments in different places, they would request that you find a new tie-off hole. So you got to plan that before you even string the racket, right?
Yeah.
And so the whole idea is to have the cleanest looking, setup, so you don't have any potential of, limit your string tension loss.
Right.
And that's one way that you can do that. So yeah, it's kind of interesting that you said that. But yeah, I mean, those are some of the things. So yeah, it's kind of funny, because when I did my MRT, it was kind of in the earlier stages, because the U.S. Racket Stringers Association, they started in the 70s, right? Sometime in the 70s. And so they were like really I guess you would call them the trade organization for racket sports. And they're really the only one in the United States. I mean, in Europe, they also have they're connected with the European Racket Stringing Association, which is kind of the brother of the USRSA, I think. They're separate entities, but I think they kind of operate sort of along the same guidelines, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But in the U.S., the USRSA is really the only one, and so they had what you call a certified. They came out with somewhere in the 80s, maybe early 90s even, they came out with what was called a certified racket technician, and I think that was a little bit easier to get. And then they stepped up and did the master racket technician, right? And that's what
Yeah.
you were talking about. Yeah, but I went to because I had just with a partner opened up a tennis shop, and it was around 1995 after college and stuff, and we that's when they had large sporting conventions, like it wasn't just for tennis, it was all sports. So you would have like Nike would have this huge like dome, I mean this big building that they would promote all of it, show off all their new stuff. And then tennis, there was a little section that for tennis as well. All the racket manufacturers would be there, all the people like promoting some of their new tennis stuff. And so they were also certifying, so you could get your MRT there. So we were in California at the time, and so we flew out there for that and got our certification. Oh, it was a great time, and that was because if you're gonna get into tennis, that's a good place to learn about the manufacturers, meet people from the companies, so that way you can kind of see what's happening in the industry. And nowadays, I think things have changed a little bit. I mean, I haven't seen anything as far as the sports convention. I don't know if they're as big as they used to be, but I know, like, for teaching pros, because you're also a teaching pro, right? They have
Yeah.
the USPTR, right? The U.S. Professional Teaching.
Yes.
And even at those events, they will have the manufacturers there a little bit, so you can connect with, people from Yonex and Wilson and Head, and
Right.
I want to say Prince, but Prince has changed so many times and have gone bankrupt. I don't even know much about who's running Prince right now, but
Yeah, I don't either.
But I mean, I do see in your background that you do have a few Prince strings. There's always those core strings, right? Like Prince synthetic gut with
Duraflex
and without Duraflex, because the without Duraflex has its strengths as well, because it has a softer feel, and and I always like the natural color, that gold, that Prince synthetic gold. I used to use that
Me too.
many times in my I used to actually play with the Prince Graphite 2, the one that the mid-size, the one that had a 14 by 16 pattern, I think it
Yeah,
was.
you can string that in 9 minutes or 8 minutes.
Yeah, I would break strings, I don't know, every other day with that thing. So I ended up having, I'd have 3 frames, then I'd have 4, then I'd find somebody else that, was selling theirs. So pretty soon I ended up with, like, I think I had 6 or 8 of those frames, just rotated them out and stuff. But so Prince, Prince has those strings, but otherwise, Premier was a pretty good, right? Multi-filament as well and stuff.
And Pro Blend was like the first big, like, indestructible string.
Yeah. And I think, when polyester first was introduced, I think it was kind of like that string where people are finally like, I don't have to play with Kevlar anymore. I can play with something else, that those frequent string breakers, right? Because I think in the 90s, or I don't know, it's sometimes hard to remember what year you're referencing, right? But it must have been the late 90s when I was stringing in Southern California and at a club, and sometimes at that time the Wilson Pro Staff, the Pro Staff, the original Pro Staff, or the second generation Pro Staff even was around, and all the 4.5 and 5.0 players were pretty much using that racket, a majority of them. And so hybrids all the time. That's all we were doing. Like, we were introducing them to the hybrids. It's kind of like, because there was a guy in Southern California, this was before Luxilon and before Wilson even really got into poly, or it was recognized as, like, you could have a whole brand just with polyester strings, right? He was this German a guy from Germany who came to Southern California and set up his own shop somewhere in the South Bay, where he was just producing polyester strings, tennis strings. And you would get them for like $2 a set. They were like yellow and, unpackaged. And I think he actually sold them to some manufacturers, like Prince and a few other companies, and then they would put it under their name or whatever. But so we would always be getting this, and we would be hybriding it. We would put the, of course, the poly in the mains, and then put, Wilson or Prince or some of the other synthetics in the crosses, and people just loved it, and it wouldn't make it, they would last longer. It was just perfect. That was kind of like the early days that I was introduced to, more of the hybrid and the benefits to that stuff.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. We kind of went off on a tangent. I don't know. We started with your MRT. I think we finished that, right? You were.
And then we started talking about polys, which I personally, I just like a nice soft multi-filament, for my arm, and I can't really use polys. Just, I've had tennis elbow, I've had shoulder issues, and the feel of an NXT or a X1 biphase, or lately I just ordered, like, I think I might have mentioned, I found some natural gut, and I've been putting natural gut on my mains and crosses, and it's just an incredible feel. It's like, so for me, for the comfort, that works out well. But I apparently, and I didn't realize that polyester had gone as far back as to when Gustavo Kuerten won the French Open, and they asked him, "What's your secret?" And he said, "Polyester strings," and no one knew what polyester strings were really. And it was he kind of put it on the map from what I've read. And are you familiar with that story? Or
Yeah, because I remember back then I was really reading tennis magazine all the time, right?
Yeah.
Every story I could find. Plus, I think at the 90, we were talking about that. I think conversing about the Lipton back in Florida and stuff, and that's when that first tournament that I strung at with Gustavo Curtin was Guga. He was a player there at that tournament and stuff. So I
Yeah.
do remember. I believe at that time that Paulie was something that he was about. That must have been about the time.
Yeah. And I was there in 1997 with Jana Novotna. I don't remember if it was called the Lipton or the Ericsson or the Sony but I was in Miami there, and then it was the NASDAQ 100, and I was there in 99, 2000, 2001 with Venus and Serena. So we were probably, I may have seen you when I brought their rackets into the
Yeah.
stringer.
And then, yeah, Miami, that's always been kind of a fun tournament because it's just got more of an international vibe there and stuff. That's probably the biggest tournaments that I prefer to string at because really the Grand Slams and stuff, it's a lot of work. I
Yeah.
mean, some people enjoy that, like, uh, but I don't know, 15 hours a day for, 15 days or even more, depending on where you are on the whole, the whole, ladder of stringers, because really, the way that those tournaments work, right? Like if you're talking about a Grand Slam, I mean, we probably don't need to get into this too long, but if we talk about like the Grand Slams, and you have not only the 2 weeks of the tournament, but you also have sometimes the qualifying,
Yeah.
sometimes all of the other events that go along with it, right? Not only you have men's and women's, but then you have like the wheelchair tennis, and you have the seniors, you
The
have
juniors.
the juniors, and all that takes you at least a week back, sometimes a little bit even more. So usually what'll happen is like the stringing team, or at least setting up the team, usually would occur um, probably a week and a half at least before the actual tournament starts. So if you are a stringer at the beginning, usually it's like the head stringer and a few other people that would set up at the beginning, along with the whichever company is sponsoring that team, right? I mean, these
Yeah.
days things keep changing because back then you'd have people like Babolat who were sponsoring a lot of the tournaments, and they would work in conjunction with like Jay's Stringing and a few other folks on tour. And most of what we're talking about here is the US. That's mostly what I'm familiar with.
Yeah.
But like you would also then have later on, like, Wilson got into the game for many of the tournaments, and that's when the Baiardo, the machine was coming on, and they were really promoting stringing and really getting that connection, because a lot of times it's a benefit for their players, right? Because if you provide representation at tournaments, it helps those players out. That's where they can pick up their string, and then they get a better deal because they're working with that brand. If they're a Wilson player, then they get taken care of and all those kind of things. And so then you have that, and then you have later on, of course, Head also has some teams, and then Luxilon was working with some teams, and now Yonex is a big part of many of these teams, because Yonex is really obviously raised their market share, right? Because it all depends on what those big companies are, right? In Europe, it's completely different. I mean, you have like Technifiber, you have uh, Pacific. Pacific used to, I mean, they had some serious stringing machines back in the day,
Hmm.
those computerized, those professional stringing machines. So, I mean, in Europe, you have and of course, Head is in Europe too. They have a lot of tournaments that they do. But I know that Technifiber has a representation, as far, and
Babolat.
yeah, and Babolat still, and usually the tournament, they're going to all have those professional stringing machines for that brand, right? They're not going to, if they're a Head team, they're not going to be using Prince stringing machines.
Right. Sure.
So it's kind of like that. I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of professional machines out there, right, on tour, in all those different venues and stuff. But anyways, back to you could potentially be there for 3 weeks. Sometimes you might only work, 2/3 of that time, like because when you start a tournament, exactly pretty much how many rackets are going to be coming in and out, because you're going to look at the last year's stats, and you're going to look at, there's certain days where you're going to have 500 rackets or 600 rackets coming in, and so you've got to have, that's how they're going to staff, what they need for the stringers. But I think, at the pro tournaments, for the most part, 12 to 14 stringers is I think a pretty standard thing. And you have to be ready to be, when you're signing those players, you have to be ready to be there all the matches that they're going to be there. You get your draw sheet for the day, and you get your, you've got your TV where you can see what matches are going on. And of course the weather conditions as they change. I mean, that was always the worst, right? When rain would happen, it's like all those rackets that you just strung, half of them come back in, especially if it was gut or some other things, depending on what the environment's like. The rackets would come back in because the players aren't going to be playing when they thought they were, because they wanted the rackets at a certain time before the match. And so now they're going to come back in. They haven't been used. I always hated having to, you see all that gut being cut that was never even used, right?
Right.
But so I mean, I don't know why I got on that tangent with the tournaments, but I think it started because we were talking about string, right? We were talking about, I don't know how I got into that, but yeah, sometimes I just go off on
it's interesting. You talk about, the tension loss. I had been using the string meter, right? Just to, are you familiar with the string meter? You put it in the string and you kind of twist the dial, you set the gauge.
Yeah, I actually just recently bought the electronic one. It's an not the ERT, but yeah, I saw it. It was barely used. They'd used it once, so I got a really good deal on it. It's kind of what you're talking about, because yours is a little knob, right?
Well, yeah, and I stopped using that a few weeks ago because I found something else. And what I found was an app. There's an app now where you can test them, right? So I downloaded this app, and it has you put in the head size, it has you put in the string material, it has you put in the string pattern. It has you put in the gauge of the string. And then what you do is you take the racket after you string it. You make sure you don't put a vibra dampener in yet. It's got to be nothing on the strings. And then you just tap it, with the end of whatever it is. I use the end of my scissors, plastic part of the scissor handle. Just tap it. And both these rackets measured within 0.2 of a pound of each other, right? So very close. And that's how I measure it now. And then when I go back to that racket, so for example, for this one, they didn't pick the rackets up till the next day. So 6 hours later, I rechecked, and both of the rackets had each lost 2 pounds in 5 to 6 hours from just sitting there. And then overnight, they had lost another 2 pounds. So this is, this was, what string was it? It may have been Hyper G. It was one of the polyesters. But I was surprised. I never really paid attention to that so much before. How the string.
It's really good that you brought us back to that point, because I think that's what we started talking about. And really, what I would, first of all, the one thing that I think it's important to note is that we're talking about reference tension. We're not talking about actual tension. So when you use these little meters, whether it's the electronic or the Bear's electronic one, which is kind of a one that's hard to get right now. I've been looking for that one, and I think even in all the places where I know to look, it's kind of like sold out or whatever.
Right.
And I think you're looking at close to $100 for that one. But the one I have is electronic, and so it'll give you a number. But it doesn't, if you string a racket at 60 pounds, and you take it off your machine and you put your little meter on there, it's not going to say 60 pounds.
Right.
I mean, it just, tension is a reference for whatever instrument you're using, and that's what we know, right? Because honestly, if you string a racket at 55 pounds, you strung 40 strings, basically, right? About 40 strings and you pulled them all at 55 pounds. The racket strings are not all the same size.
Right.
You're not pulling every string at 50, when you think about what you're really pulling, right? So, I mean, so we just use that as a reference and go, okay, well, I pulled on my machine 55 pounds. This is, that's what we call 55 pounds, right? But
right.
When we use that little tool, we use it gives us another number, and then we can take that number And then next week, when you check that racket, you put that same meter on the same spot and it gives you another number. You figure out what percent that you lost, and then it can
Right.
tell you, wow, I've just lost 20% of my tension. And so then it lets you know, like, when it's going to be time. And that's a good thing for the racket stringers if you have one of those, because you could like tell your customer, hey, let me check where your strings are. Sorry, I got to plug in my computer here.
Yeah.
Let me check what the strings are, and then that way we can keep your rackets performing, because it's a slow process, right? All of a
Yeah.
sudden one day you're out there hitting and you're like, man, the balls are going a little long, or it's just not getting that feel, and that's because you lost probably 30%.
Yeah.
Because recently what I did was I looked at a study where I don't remember exactly where I got all that information. Maybe it was like even Tennis Warehouse, or someplace online where they've done a lot of, where they do the testing of all the strings to really
Yeah.
figure out tension loss and so forth. And I looked at all of and I put it all in one long sheet. And really, for the most part, we all know that natural gut keeps its tension the best. Then it's generally the synthetics, and then the polys, right? Because the polys lose the most, just in the
Sure.
general category. There's exceptions in each and so forth, but that's really the gamut of how it goes. And if you can figure out that multifilament string, or I'm just using it as an example, if you figure out which multifilament keeps its tension the best, wouldn't you want to go with that one, right?
Right.
Because most of the multifilaments, they have some decent playability, and some variabilities in the different, what's the difference between an NXT, a Premier, and then a Technifiber NRG. They do have their own nuances, and you can tell when you're stringing them, the way that they're elongating. And with NRG, I've always felt that it was more of a rubbery string, and it just has this elongation. So I would maybe pre-stretch that one before I even string it, to keep a little bit more of that, a little more of that power and keep it from losing its tension. But the whole idea of what I'm saying there is just about tension loss. We don't realize how much it really happens, right? And I think
Right.
that's like the polyester strings. That's why for the majority of recreation players, or for the club players, it's really not for them. But the
Yeah.
companies are really selling poly strings as the way to go. I mean, a lot of them now have kind of said, you know what, it's not for, because it is harder on your arm, and you lose so much tension, and then if it's even worse on your arm once you've
Right.
lost a lot of tension, right? And so it just doesn't perform. But for the professional players, they're only using it for 2 hours, or maybe not even that, because if they're going on court with 6 rackets, some players are going to switch it out every other ball change, or they're going to switch it out. They're going to switch it out every 3 games, or whatever. And at the
Yeah.
end of that, at the end of their match, they're going to keep 2 of their rackets and use them for hitting the next day. But then they're going to turn around and restring them all. So if we could do that every time we play, I wouldn't mind trying some poly,
Right. Sure.
I'll find one that works for me, because it does have some nice characteristics. But if you're going to leave it in your racket for weeks on end, it really is gone.
Yeah. You're not getting a lot of, you're not getting a lot out of it if that's what you're doing. But it's like you said, I think it's so well promoted now and advertised that a lot of the young kids, I coach tennis with some juniors, and a lot of the kids want it. And a lot of times I try to talk them out of it, or at least let's go with a hybrid, or if we're going to do a poly, well, let's do an 18 gauge, or it's, and you have to be careful too, because I never paid attention to the gauges before, but Solinco Hyper G 17 gauge is the same thing as Head Hawk Tour 18 gauge. They're both 1.20 diameter. So, I mean, every company kind of has their own system for gauging.
Yeah, you got
So
to look at the diameters. You really got to look at the diameters.
yeah, because 18 in Head is 17 in Solinco, or vice versa. So
Yeah.
you do have to look at them and stuff. But I will go with the thin polyester for the kids, just and I'll string it a little bit lower too. And so we'll see.
Have you noticed that over the last couple years that the poly strings have gotten thinner? Because now you can find a really thin 19 gauge. I mean, I think I've even found like one. I mean, I know that back when I was stringing a lot of Luxilon, I would use what was called Timo at the time. They don't have that anymore, but Timo was one of the thinner ones I could get back then. I don't know what it was, maybe 115 or 112 even, but now I've seen like 105 maybe. I don't know what it goes down to now, but
Hyper G has a 20, and I don't know what the diameter is, but they have a 20 gauge.
So that's got to be at least 110 or 105 maybe.
Right.
I don't know. But it gets really thin, and for the most part, thinner is going to be better on your arm. However, sometimes the way some of them are, maybe it's not always the case, but yeah, if you go a little bit lighter, like stringing it not as tight, 4 pounds. I know a lot of people when they're stringing hybrids are worried about the tension on the racket and what ultimately that is going to create over time, because if you have a big variance. Now, I always suggest, stringing machines make a big difference, right? When we're talking about keeping your racket to the shape that it's supposed to be in to some degree, right? 2-point mounting systems are just not going to have that ability. No matter how careful you are, there's going to be a potential for more frame distortion, right?
Sure.
But when you have that 6-point mounting, and of course, 99% of the professional machines, I don't want to say 100 because there's always one out there, but because, I know there's, companies will come up with the 2-point ones as well, but yeah, for the most part, having that 6-point mounting system is key, right? Because it keeps it. But I think if you're within like 4 pounds, maybe 6, that kind of range, and if you don't go too high or too low, I think you're not going to have too big of a problem. I think if you're looking at 10-pound ranges difference between crosses and mains or more, you might come up with some problems.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, and everyone, it's one of those things too where tennis players have their good days, they have their bad days. It's like I forget what book I read it in, but there's this spiral in a tennis player's life, and the top of the spiral is their highest and the bottom of the spiral is their lowest, and they're kind of the player that they are is the average of their high and their low, kind of. And if they happen to go out on their good day with a new string job and happen to have a great day, well, this is now the greatest string and this is the way, you know what I mean? But if they put a string in and they happen to have a bad day, and maybe they would have had a bad day with any string combination, but now they hate that string. So sometimes it just, it's just a matter of stepping on the court, and you happen to have a great day with this string job, this becomes your new favorite string type of thing. So it is hard, and it's nice that there's so many varieties, because I have some people that I string for that are constantly trying new combinations. And I just strung a couple rackets for someone. I said, well, let's do one and make sure you like it. And I reached out to them. Hey, how'd you like it? Let's do the other one just like that. So I'm like, all right, they must have had a good day with it. So
right, exactly. And a lot of times when folks are looking to maybe change, or they're looking for something better and they're looking for your opinion, I always like to just say, let's change up one variable. Don't change up 2 things, because then we don't really know what it is that's working. I mean, it sounds obvious, right? But a lot of times what we'll do is we'll change string and we'll change tension, or we'll at the same time, or we'll change a racket and change tension and or string. So now you've got all these variables that you're changing.
What was it that helped?
Yeah, what is it that helped? And then you have to figure it out later on. So I always say just change one variable. So if you're still playing with the same racket and you don't like for some reason, the tension string combo doesn't work for you, either let's change out this string, keep the tension, or let's keep the string and change the tension.
It's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Just because that way you can really hone in on what it is and fine tune all that. But since we're talking about all this with stringing and stringing machines and stuff, I want to hear about your experience, because I understand you just got a Wilson Baiardo, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man, that's awesome.
Yeah. That was one of my, I have my house, my piano, maybe my nice bicycle, and now my Baiardo. That's one of my best purchases ever.
That's a nice used car right there, huh?
Yeah. So I I looked around. So I had a nice machine. So the Ectalon that I strung on the tour in 1996, was still a working machine 3 years ago. I was still using it, and I wasn't, ready to get rid of it, but the parts just slowly started breaking down. And then I decided I want to get a little more serious about stringing, get my certification. So I started with a gamma progression ELS machine, which is a
Okay.
which is
Well,
a
can we go back? Can we go back to your Prince machine first? Was
yeah.
it the one that had the rails on it,
No,
where it
I'm
stood?
sorry, not Prince, Ectalon.
Oh, the Ectalon. But did the Ectalon, did they slide on the
Yes,
rails?
yes.
Yeah. So now you're understanding how the importance of having complete, control over each clamp
Oh
individually, how
yeah.
important that is, huh?
What
Yeah.
a difference. What a difference. So yeah, so it's just been so nice to, and that for me, that's one of the nice things about holding on to something for so long until it's really, then you really appreciate the new technology. If you're waiting 20 years for something new, you really appreciate the new technology. So the Gamma Progression ELS was a great machine. But I started getting a little bit busier with my stringing, not a ton still, but maybe 400 rackets I'll do this year. And I'm trying to build that. And I thought it would be just great to have a real top-notch quality machine. And so I started looking around at all the machines, from the Babolat's to the Yonex to the. But Wilson is such a big name in the U.S. in racket sports, and probably around the world also. But I just see how big Wilson is here, and I know that they were the official stringing machine of the U.S. Open, and even at the French Open. I don't know if this past year or the year before, they were the official machine at the Australian Open. So I started looking for them, and I couldn't find one anywhere. And then I was told that, hey, sometimes you can get them used from the U.S. Open or the Sony Ericsson.
Yeah. If you
Um,
get on that preferred list, right?
if you can get on the preferred list. So I reached out to I forget who, Roman, RPNY, I think is a
Yeah, yeah,
Roman.
in
Yeah.
New York, right. Yeah, he must be
Yes.
pretty close he must be pretty close to you.
Well, I'm actually 300 miles west of New York City, so I'm out
Okay.
by
Okay.
Rochester.
So
So
yeah,
I'm
you
I'm
have to, because he's in the city, because I know he's in the city.
yeah, I'm 90 miles from Niagara Falls, so he's
Oh,
close to the
wow.
city. But so anyway, he mentioned they don't do it at the Sony anymore down south, but the U.S. Open
Right.
is very, very hard to get on that list, and you have to go through your local regional Wilson rep to do it. So anyway, so I happened to find a machine, the last one in stock. They're sold out all over the place,
Yeah.
but I found one. It finally arrived like 2 weeks ago, and I've strung maybe 10 or 12 rackets on it so far, and I love it. And the first racket I did on it was mine, and I cut out a brand new string job because I was just so eager. I wanted to string, and I didn't have anything to string, so I just cut out the strings, put it on, and I wasn't sure, because I had done maybe 700 rackets on my old machine, and I just was used to it. So I was like, but now that I'm 12 rackets in, I can't see myself stringing on another machine. I mean, when I press my name, I have my name programmed into the
Right.
machine, and it kind of raises itself up and then tilts toward me a little bit. So I don't have to. It's quite a nice machine, and I'm thrilled with it so far. And that's the nice thing that you mentioned about these string gauges, is if I do 3 rackets, the same racket, and do each of them at 56 pounds, well, with this app I have on my phone, after I put in the data, it should all be pretty doggone close. And if one is reading 38 and the other is 47 and the other, I know something's wrong with my machine. But every one of these are within a tenth or 2/10 of a pound. You,
Yeah.
you can kind of keep track of, like, is your machine or your clamps slipping, or are your whatever.
Yeah.
So
And I think that you bring up a couple good points. One is that what people don't really ever check on their machines is the calibration, right? When it's a computerized machine, many of the machines, to some degree, because they're also computer, the high tech these days, right? So they, to some degree, can calibrate themselves up to a certain point. But I remember, even at any of the tournaments, every morning when we first all get to our machine, we have to check calibration. You put in the computer, the calibration tool, which you put between the
right.
clamp, and then you do pulls at different tensions, at a low, medium, and a high tension, and you want to make sure that it comes out as is. Otherwise, you have to adjust it, because it can get a little bit out here and there. So even for you, maybe, set like a parameter for yourself, like every 100 rackets or maybe every month, I will check the calibration just to make sure so that you don't get off.
Yeah.
Even on high end equipment like what you have now, it's still something that you should keep. And you want to know, because if there's something wrong with it, or slipping, or
Yep.
the calibration just isn't quite where it should be. But yeah, those machines do a lot of their own diagnostics. I think you can run a diagnostic check on the machine, and it'll
Yeah.
tell you if everything is working out. And a lot of those bells and whistles that are on those kind of machines are really the bells and whistles that pro tour stringers want. Not, you go, well, I don't want to spend extra on having the machine raise itself and set to my my preferences. I'm the only one stringing. Well, it's different at a tournament, right? Because there
Right.
might be other, or a shop, like a large stringing, like an online stringing company, or like that does large volume of stringing, or at a box store that has 4 or 5 people using the machine, and just being able to do all that, raising it up right then, it just saves you so much time, right? And
Yeah.
a lot of times you'd forget to do that if you didn't remember, because if you look at a lot of people stringing too, they're always leaning over the machine to a point where that's not really natural for our body, right? So at
Right.
least this can hopefully help in the ergonomics a little bit. And now, maybe you'll still be able to string when you're 80.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, you can program, I don't know if it's 6 or 12 names in
Yeah,
here, which
that's right.
obviously I only
Yeah,
need myself, but
yeah,
as I start to teach my kids too, as they're getting older and stuff,
right.
so we'll put their names in there. But it was one of those kind of unnecessary purchases, but I just felt like, if I am excited about learning this craft and continuing to learn it, and also just offer my clients, the best racket
Oh
stringing
yeah,
job that they can get. I
right.
want to say
It's,
that you have a top machine here. I'm using
yeah,
a great machine. I've gone through the certifications. I study stringing. I study the rackets, and you know, I kind of I do what should be done. I do all the quality checkpoints
hmm
to give you a great stringing a job, and having a top quality machine is part of it. But also it's all the little things that add up to a complete great experience. It's not just having the machine, because you can do the worst job on the best machine.
yeah,
So it's just all those things that make a difference. And it's like tennis, when you're improving your game. Well, if you can improve your forehand 2%, your backhand 2%, your overhead 3%, your serve 4%, all of a sudden you're starting to really make some good. So it's the same thing with your stringing. If everything from your pre-check to your stringing to your post-check, I mean, it all adds up to how the type of quality that the output is. So
yeah. And ultimately, that's how you're going to get everybody coming back to you, right? Because you're going to take the time to take care of their racket, and that's really what they want. They just want to have it consistent, and they want to have it the way that they want, and they want somebody who they can count on and stuff, and a lot of
yeah,
times having that, and just being there for always knowing what they need, so that every time they don't, it's like, oh yeah, I didn't write that, because if you don't write it down and you don't keep track of your customers, then
yeah,
it kind of shows that you're not really giving them that individualized attention. But if you know everything that you've done before, and it's like that,
yeah.
just that could be worth it. I mean, that could be huge, right?
That
So
was one of the best things I did before I started, is I set up an Excel spreadsheet. Now I can, each person, I have every one of the tension. I have a little part for for my tension check, so I can see, so I can look now and see what was it last time I checked afterward, and and whether they paid or not, whether they have, want a vibra dampener in there, or they want a stencil on it, or just all those little things. And now what I do is, now that I have a new machine, because if I mention to someone I have a Prince Baiardo or a Wilson Baiardo, that it doesn't really mean anything to the normal tennis player. But I write up a tiny little thing like, hey, I just want to let you know your racket was strung on a Wilson Baiardo. This is considered among some to be one of the great machines out there. It was used at the U.S. Open. It was used at Australia. So they get a sense of like, wow, this is that's great. So they might not have cared either way, but if you're trying to keep that client, and it helps little things like that, to type up a little something and print 100 copies, and when you hand them the racket, give them this little piece of paper and
Well,
let them know
that's a
you
really
take.
good, that's a really good point because many times I'm talking about how you can increase your value, right? Building value in what you do, and that's one of those things. That's one of those soft
Yeah,
value that you can't, that you might not be able to monetize. You can't see like, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to get this dollar benefit from it. It's just one of those things. It's one of those skills that, or one of those benefits that I think just plays into the whole of it. And I think when you're talking about the machine and you're talking about writing it down, that's important because if you get a racket in for the first time and they're like, oh yeah, I had it strung at 55 pounds last time from this guy. Well, what does that really mean? I mean, he strung it
right.
at 55 pounds, but you don't know who that person was. You don't know what kind of machine they used. So you almost have to start over. Even though you
Yeah,
have something to reference from, you have to also share with them, you know what, I use the top of the line computerized. That's another opportunity for you to like
yeah,
share about what you're doing, because then you can also compare it, because it's important to do that. Because if you just say, oh yeah, I had it strung at 55 with my last guy, and then you string it at 55 and it's like, wow, it feels tighter or it feels different,
yeah.
right?
When was the last time your guy cleaned his clamps? When was your
Yeah,
last time your guy cleaned his tension head? When,
yeah,
so I can't, I don't know what he did. I know what I do. So, right.
yeah.
It's really, and that's why someone like Federer travels with a stringer. Or Agassi used to travel with a stringer,
Hmm.
because every machine can be different. Even if there are two Baiardos next to each other, I guess
Yeah,
supposedly, they could be string a little different, and you might get a
yeah,
little different tension. I don't know. So,
right. Because at that level, it's noticeable, or they feel like it is noticeable, or they can sense some difference, and
yeah,
for them it could be a match point, right? I mean, because
yeah,
ultimately that equipment has to be uh, up to, so for them it's like you need to do it when they need to have it, and you need to do, whether it's 5 rackets, 10 rackets, it has to be done because that's what they need for their game, so it's yeah, it's pretty critical at that level. But it's nice to be able to have those machines. And earlier when you were saying how you made the decision to purchase a Wilson, I guess I didn't put as much thought into that specific. Well, I'll tell you what it is that you said when you said that. Yeah, I was looking at the different machines that were available to me, and I wanted one that has good representation here, one that possibly, if something did go wrong, or I needed some guidance on it, or I needed some replacement part, I could be sure to get it, because that should be a consideration when we're looking at machines, right? Because I'm going to be
yeah,
looking at, hopefully in the next, we'll see, but hopefully in the next, when I reach 1,000 subscribers, I want to really start getting back into having, because I've used the Star 3 and 4 for many years. I sold my Star 3 maybe 4 or 5 years ago, because that was when I was like, oh, I'm not going to be stringing that much anymore. So maybe I don't know why I sold it. I should have just kept that one, but so to get another computerized machine. But I every once in a while I see one come up, whether it's on eBay or other places, a used machine. I'm like, oh, that wouldn't be so bad. And I'm like thinking, there's a Star 4 that I could pick up, but it needs some repair. And it's like,
right.
well, those you can still, there is a company in the US, right, out towards where you are, a tennis stringing repair place, and they do repair. But I mean, I've heard, they're not always as fast as, it might
Okay.
take a while, and you'd have to send the machine to them, and it could be costly. But Babolat machines, you're probably always going to be able to get parts, no matter how old the machine. But if it is old, if it is a Star 3 or 4 from 20, 25 years ago, that could be a challenge, right? And some of the older, like Chinese, the machines that are just made in some factory in China, and that are just, whether it's Ignis, or whether it's some of the alphas, or gamma, or whatever, you might have some trouble finding parts for those things, and they might not really be worth repairing.
Right.
So it is important, if you're going to buy something. That's why I was looking at some, like Yonex. I was looking at maybe the Yonex machines. They have a few really nice ones. I've strung on some Prince machines in the past, and Gamma machines, and some of those are fine. But I think either Babolat or Yonex, or maybe, you know, maybe that Baiardo light or something like that. Cause I really don't need all the ergonomics of I mean, I
Right.
can manually set it up if it's for me. Plus it's a little bit lighter that way.
Yeah.
As long as it doesn't have missing any of the other features or anything like that. Cause yeah, I have strung a lot of rackets on a Baiardo, and it's a great machine. You know, it's solid. I mean, that you could tell it's a solid machine, and it doesn't, if you looked at some of the other machines these days, like the top of the line Babylon machines and the Yonex, they look all space age, right? And even some of those Prince and Technifiber, they look all like really like from the space age. But the Wilson, is just basically it's like an American made car, right? It's solid. It has it looks nice, but it's not like all spacey looking and stuff. So I like
Right.
that. It's kind of gets the job done and consistently.
Yeah. It's a big machine. It's a nice machine. It's a big machine. It's 100, I don't know, 120, 130 pounds.
Yeah.
But
Well,
put it
just the
on.
base. I remember that base is pretty heavy itself too.
Yeah.
And it for traveling, that would be a little bit harder, because I mean I know, at tournaments and stuff, many of the tournaments, they don't ship this. Sometimes they'll leave some of the machines. If it's a tournament they do every year, they'll have a local place possibly
Yeah.
to store a lot of those. But some of them do get shipped. But that's a big expense right there, just shipping these machines to tournament. And many times when we were back in the day, like even when Jay, he strung on those Star 4s for many years, and those are easy to transport. They were a little bit lighter, and
Yeah.
really, if you didn't use the base, they nicely set on a desktop. And so,
Yeah.
like, if you're stringing out of a hotel room or whatever, and I know even people who made cases specific, like those hard cases specifically for the Star 4, because that was so popular. You could buy a case for the Star 4 that you could put it in and
Huh.
then travel with it. And
Yeah. You would not travel with a Bayardo. No
no,
way.
no, not if you're doing it on your own, right? Because
No.
that would be too heavy, and it would be just,
Yeah.
you need something a little bit lighter. So if you are going to be traveling with your machine, you really do need to find something that's probably a little bit easier to travel with.
Yeah. I'd bring the Gamma progression, the ELS. I still have that, and um, it's interesting too, because I almost wish I had one that wasn't dependent on electricity, just in case too. So but both my machines are dependent on electricity, so I got to hope I don't have a power outage when I need to string. So
Yeah, and you might, I know many times, like at tournaments and other things, using a surge protector might be worth your while too. So that way, if there is a power surge or something, you're not gonna blow up your machine. A lot of
right.
times we do that with computers, right? If we're in a place where potentially there's, weather-wise or otherwise, we
Good point.
connect computers to surge protectors, so that way you're not gonna, have that surge come through and mess up your.
That's one thing I did at my place when I bought it, is I had a whole house surge protector built into the circuit box.
Oh wow, okay.
So
Well, that's great.
yeah, I
So
mean it
man,
was.
we've covered a lot here. We've been going for about an hour and stuff. So I guess we should probably, for this episode, maybe just find a few quick little things to talk on, and maybe think of a few ideas for maybe like the next time,
Yeah.
because I think it's really a good place to like share some things, and hopefully it was interesting to my audience, and it's just fun to be able to talk to somebody else, because sometimes just talking to the camera about a specific topic, is a little bit harder. So it's easier to be able to just sit in dialogue. And that's really what I used to enjoy, just talking about tennis. And, we could talk about some of our experiences in stringing it. Well, for me, some of my experiences at tournaments, some things that I've done. And for you, some of those just, when you're just at a tournament, or if you're around tennis, things just happen that are just kind of like, wow, that was cool, or wow, that was
Yeah.
weird, or things that you learned, along the way, and maybe, what you've learned about strings, and, where you
Sure.
pick up, where you buy your strings. Cause for most of the stringers that for the audience, that I have, most of the people are part-time stringers, or they're looking to get into stringing, or they are looking to possibly make it a bigger part of their daily, um, their daily job maybe or something, and they're just looking for tips and ways to better that. So they're not going to be necessarily big shops that have retail, that have accounts with the large
Right.
manufacturers, because obviously if you have a tennis shop, whether it's one or whether it's a franchise, you are connecting directly. The same, that's what I did when I had a shop, right? You would have to call up Wilson, you would have to call up Prince, and you'd open up an account, and many times you have to like say, okay, I'm going to buy $5,000 worth this year, 10,000. You have to commit to a certain amount, and you get all the freebies, and you get all the discounts, and you get the
Yeah.
connections and things like that. So for the people that don't do that, how can they get the best value for buying stuff? We know, there's wholesalers, and
Right.
then other places, maybe even outside the United States, where sometimes you can get good deals on strings. I mean, when I lived in Southern California, Gosen had a Southern California office, right? And many times I could just go there and pick up string for $2 a set.
Wow.
You get a bunch, and a lot of times, Gosen was a manufacturer, so they actually, like Prince would market some of their strings under Gosen, and other companies I think probably did too. And so it was string that they just wasn't good enough to, or it was string that was just blank label kind of stuff,
Sure. Yeah.
and so you get to know those kind of things, and being in Southern California, there was a lot of those like wholesalers where you can pick up just discounted strings and stuff, and so I miss, I don't have some of those connections close by, because I don't live in Southern California anymore, and I think next time I go, I'm going to have to try to see what's out there still, because that's when I was a sales rep out there. I would visit all the shops, so I kind of knew where everybody
Right.
was. But I obviously things have changed over the time, but some of them are probably still there. And there was even, just, I don't know, quick little story, but there was even, I met a guy in Southern California who had a warehouse space, and he had about 15 of those, because he bought some stuff from me when I was a rep, and so it was somebody that I would call on sometimes, and then I learned that he had like 15 of those Echelon machines that you have,
Okay.
that the old
Yeah.
machine with the rails, and he had them sitting in the warehouse. And I'm like, wow, what are you running here, right? And so back then, like Prince and Wilson would send him, he would have a contract with them, and when all of the retail rackets that were strung, you go into a Big Fives, or you go into, I don't know, if you probably have Dick's Sporting Goods, or what do you have?
Yeah. Dick's. We have Dick's here. Dick's Sporting Good.
Or Sports Chalet, or whatever it is. They'd have they'd have hundreds of rackets on their wall, and they were all strung, right? Well, they have to be strung somewhere. So what would happen is Wilson or whatever would send him like 500 rackets or 1,000 rackets at a time, and his team of workers would string these rackets up, and then he would send them back to the factory strung and decal and stenciled,
Yeah.
right?
Wow.
And so, of course, the stringers didn't get paid a whole lot per frame, but usually they did these frames in about 7 minutes each
Wow.
on those machines. I mean, you're talking double pulls. I don't
Yeah.
know if you ever picked up those retail, some of the knots and things. Yeah, so they would be sometimes double pulled, and I know I got the light coming in now on me, but yeah,
Oh, do you?
they'd be double pulled, and they would just be like, they'd put wax on the strings so that when they're pulling the crosses, they won't burn the string,
Okay. Gotcha.
stuff like that. And so, and then afterwards, you'd have to get all the wax off and stuff, and it was just kind of interesting. It was
Yeah.
like learning that something like that existed. And I was thinking like, because he was retiring, I was thinking maybe I should do that, But then the whole idea of, yeah, I never ended up doing it, but I was thinking, wow, that I didn't even know that kind of existed,
I didn't either. But you go into those big stores and you take out some of the strings, and you put your fingers around two mains, and you can just push them right together. You're like, wait, this has got to be a double pull, a triple.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's and they'll just use the middle reference tension and just go, okay, set that machine to 55 and just put the
yeah.
strings in. You got 7 minutes, right? Because otherwise,
Wow.
Yeah, it's almost like a sweatshop, right? Or
Yeah,
something. But
no
yeah,
kidding.
it was interesting. But it's just some of those things that you pick up and you learn just by being around tennis and stuff. And actually, Herb Wise, I think it's Herb, that was his name, right? The gentleman who invented the Wise stringing, the electronic stringing machine that you can connect to any
Oh
manual
yeah,
machine,
right.
the Weiss unit. I
Yes.
remember I had my shop back then in Southern California when he would go around promoting that. Like that was when nobody knew it existed, right? So it was
Hmm.
like the prototype. He was taking it to tennis shops to get our opinions on what we thought of it. And it's kind of like, well, we're using professional machines, and so why would we want this little thing? But
Right.
it's actually, as far as the performance of it and the reliability and the tension components that are in there, it's a decent. I mean, I think it would be worth taking any crank machine, putting that $600 onto it, and you'd have a decent machine. I mean, at least a consistent machine. I mean,
Yeah, I've heard good things about them. I've never used one, but there's a pro shop here in town who had one on one of their machines, and
yeah,
from what I hear, they're a great option if you don't want to spend a fortune and you already have a machine that's
yeah.
not electric.
Yeah, and I mean, I can't believe that there are still tennis shops that don't have. I mean, not to say anything bad about anybody's shop, but
Right.
that still use manual machines, and that's all they have. I mean,
Right.
a whole tennis shop, and they just are still using, standard. I mean, that I just can't believe it, because there is a difference. You can feel the difference between
Oh yeah.
a constant pull and a manual machine. And for those out there that don't really understand how that difference of that is, when you are pulling on a constant pull machine, when you pull that string, you release the clamp. The machine continues to pull to keep the tension,
Right.
right? And so
Yeah.
that's why it's called a constant pull, because it's constantly pulling until you end up finally tying off. But with a crank machine, you pull to whatever, you crank it to whatever tension, and it stops. You release the clamp. Well, what do you think happens? The string slips back to wherever the last one was pulled, right? I mean, you lose a little bit on each one, and it's
Yeah.
a whole different feel.
Hmm.
And so if we're talking about string bed stiffness, and we're talking about um, uh, uh, having a sweet spot, in your racket and stuff, all those kind of things, matter, right? And actually, I had a few people contact me recently about the Sergetti stringing method, proportional stringing. We'll have to get into that sometime.
Yeah.
We'll do a little bit more about that. Really, what that is you're adjusting the string. You're adjusting your tension of
Tension.
every string based on the length of the string to have a
Right.
more proportional stringing, and create a larger sweet spot.
Yeah.
And it makes
Interesting.
sense. It makes sense. The science of it makes sense, but the reality of it is just, it's not utilized like, possible. But yeah, it's something to discuss. So I'd like to get into that more some other times. But what kind of things do you have that maybe we'd want to maybe share and bring to the table next time, if you have
Um,
them?
well, there's just I happen to I had the experience of working for Jana Novotna when she was at the end of her career.
Mhm.
Uh,
What,
a
what
year,
was her ranking? What was her top ranking? How high did she get?
I don't know if she ever got to number one. She won Wimbledon.
Uh-huh.
The year after, 6 months or a year after I stopped working with her, she won Wimbledon. When I was with her, she won the Chase Championships, which was, I guess, maybe her biggest singles title at the time at Madison Square Garden.
Yeah.
So I don't know if she reached number one, but I think she was number two in the world. But it was interesting because it was the end of her career. So every waking minute of the day was dedicated to her performance, from diet, nutrition, physio, massage, stretching,
All
on
that.
court training, tactical, physical, mental. Whereas when I hit with Venus and Serena, they were young and they were just, cartwheels across the tennis court and let's play basketball when we're done with practice. And, I remember being at a tournament with Venus once, and she had to play a match in a couple hours, and I was going to pick up a little lunch for myself in New Haven. And she said, "Where are you go?" I said, "Venus, you want me to get you anything?" And she said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm just going to go get a slice of pizza or something." She's like, "Why don't you get me a fettuccine Alfredo?" And she was serious. I said, Venus, you're playing in 2 hours. Don't you think fettuccine Alfredo is a heavy meal before a match? I'll be fine, Brad. Now this is in 1999, so they didn't really have even a manager yet. They were on their own. So I called the restaurant out of earshot from Venus, said, look, extra light on the Alfredo, please. And so
really, all it will take is because at the tournaments and stuff, obviously the food is the best, right? I mean, they have all the top chefs and they're sitting there, they'll serve it to the players and the food is great. But if a food poisoning outbreak or one of the players gets food poisoning, I mean, that ends your tournament right there. So yeah, you would think that, obviously your coach, for the most part, keeps track of all that and makes sure.
Yeah, and it was just pasta is such a heavy meal, before you go on the court and stuff. But one of the things we could talk about is just kind of the differences, not so much related to the stringing, but if just to throw in other things about training with Novotna compared to training with Venus and Serena early on at the beginning. Now there was a ton of training, hard training, but they were completely different in the way they approached their training, and it changed after 3 years that I was with them. They, all of a sudden they had a physio on board. They had, managers, PR. They had, they took fitness training a bit more serious. But it was kind of interesting. So that was fun, and I spent some other time hitting with Eva Maioli a little bit. I went to a couple tournaments with her. And I think I mentioned Jeff Tarango. I hit with him at the Leg Mason and stuff. So I had some experiences just as a hitting partner. And then I had some experiences playing the entry-level pro tournaments, which was fun, the satellites and stuff.
And at that level, you're stringing your own rackets and you're bringing your own stringing machine and you're sharing rooms. You're sharing a room with other players because at that rate, every dollar counts, right?
Oh yeah, we had 5-6 guys in Motel 6 or Super 8. It was
it's not glamorous, huh?
It was ridiculous. We were sleeping in tents at the end of in California. We'd buy a single person tent at Walmart, and they had a 30-day money back guarantee or return. So at the end of the 4-week tournament, we'd return it because we were that poor, So we, I almost want to send a gift to the Walmart, for all the stuff we did. But you're trying to survive out there, but.
Yeah, because because if you make it through and you actually get around or something, then the ATP or whoever would pick up, your hotel room. But then as soon as you lose, that's it, right? You're out.
You might have it. You might have a day or two, and they give you a per diem. I think you got a per diem when you were stringing and stuff, right? So the players get a per diem and stuff, and it was nice. And I had a lot of experience because I worked for Novotna, because I worked for the Williams sisters. Any great thing that was going on in town, I would have access to because. I was kind of the gatekeeper to Venus and Serena. So I would get, I got tickets to the Lakers or the Celtics and the Philadelphia 76ers. And so there were a lot of neat experiences that go along with that, which was such a difference from when I was in the Super 8 to all of a sudden I'm in the Plaza Hotel for 2 weeks, so it was a big difference.
It's funny that you talk about Serena and Venus a lot because, being in Southern California all those years and, they had, that's kind of their home turf. Right. And so that tournament, one of the tournaments that I strung at, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years, as long as it was going pretty much was, that tournament in Southern California is a smaller tournament, Carson it was in Carson. It was started out as the Manhattan Beach Open and so forth. But they were always the headliners there and they'd always play, and Lindsay Davenport always played. And so it was kind of cool to always see them there. And, Richard was always there and just to kind of, be around that a lot and, just to kind of see them a little bit on more of a, person level, not, celebrity level or whatever. And, that was years ago, but yeah, I mean, obviously things have changed now. They've, they're stratosphere level, stars, right? And they, have all these other things that they're involved in, and they've kind of really, but tennis, they stuck with tennis, right? It's not like if you remember, like in Anna Kournikova or whatever, I was working for Yonex at the time. They were representing her, I think.
Oh yeah.
So, she obviously didn't last in tennis very long or whatever, and you just never know, right? And injuries happen and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, all that kind of stuff would be fun. Just keep. We could probably just have, hours and hours of.
Yeah. Richard was great.
Somebody else that you can talk about. But just, you were talking about Nabotna. Yeah, she made it to number 2 in 1997. That was her career high in 1997. And she held Oh no, wait a minute. She held #1 ranking in doubles for 67 consecutive or non-consecutive weeks.
Yeah, well, I
So,
forgot she was an amazing
yeah,
doubles player, right?
doubles, right, is where sometimes some of those players, doubles is a lot easier gig, right? Because
Yeah,
it's a whole different. I mean, I think your body can last a lot longer. I mean, there was a bunch of guys in Southern California, right, that were good doubles players. I mean, of course, the Bryan brothers, and then Pugh and Leach and all those guys, and they, a lot of those could still, they were playing the senior tour even professionally at the tournament still,
yeah. Play a
and
little bit
still
later,
doing
longer.
well. Right. I mean, you could keep playing, and I remember a person that used to always come into the club there that I was stringing at for a while was Natasha Zaverev. I don't know if you remember that
I
name. She's
remember I've
Russian.
talked to her. Yeah,
And
she
she
was
was one
great.
of those. She was a nice. I mean, she was so fun, and she was like never. She didn't take tennis very serious anymore. It was kind of just like, yeah, it's tennis. I'm good, whatever. And she doesn't ever like really talk about tennis.
She played with Gigi, right? Gigi Fernandez, right?
Yeah, I think so. And then she tried to go a little bit. I think she tried to do a lot more singles, but that never really worked out well. I think Steffi Graf, she had some matches with her, and I think it just. I mean, I don't remember now, but I think she just gravitated towards doubles, and then I don't know, she was like #1 in doubles for I don't know how many years. Right?
She was excellent. I'm pretty sure it was Fernandez Zaverev, and they were an excellent team.
Yeah, I think you could be right. And then she played some mixed doubles probably too and stuff. But yeah, some of those players back then and stuff, just what you remember from being around tennis and stuff, and
yeah,
just you go in the right places and stuff like that. But that's the thing is like if you want to be a stringer, you got to put yourself out there in those kind of places. Look at where you could start. Plugging in. Start going to tournaments. I mean, there's tournaments, whether it's challengers or whether it's
sure, futures or
futures and stuff, and just kind of hang out and watch the matches, look where the stringers are, see what they're stringing, see what they're ask questions, and then just try to get there. I remember there'd be people that would I used to know people who would get like a little van or something, and they'd take their machine on the road and they'd go to where these tournaments were and just string out the parking lot.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Or
right.
or the hotel room. If you can connect with a couple pro players or some people that and just string out of a hotel room.
Yeah, a lot of times you have to be careful at the tournaments because the pro shops or the tournament directors, they want the stringing revenue. So you just got to get word that hey, you're at the parking lot across the street of the club, not in the club's parking lot.
Good point.
And then but it's interesting stuff. So for myself, like the reason I watched a lot of your videos, I enjoy the stringing. I've learned a ton about stringing, and I've learned things from watching your videos, and I'm learning from watching and talking to other people too. So I enjoy that kind of video. But I also, if your audience is interested in stories about what it was like with Venus and Serena, and Richard Williams was my roommate, we would always share a hotel room together, and so I got to be very close with Richard. So I can,
that would be some, because that movie's coming out soon, right?
Yeah, he's got that. You're right. The movie's coming out soon, so we could talk about just stuff, what I learned from Richard and what it was like traveling with him and being in a suite for 2 weeks with him, and so
yeah, that would be good. That would be good. Yeah, we should do that as soon as it comes out. I'll have to watch it, and then
we could talk about it and whatever.
Yeah.
Or we could totally just be a blender of different topics, and
we'll see. Maybe we won't get any views. There'll be a video here. This video, we'll put it out, this hour and 20-minute long video, and nobody will watch it. But you know what? It was still fun. I don't care.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was fun. I'm glad that, thanks for taking the time out of your Saturday. I know you need to go get on the court and stuff in the cold indoor courts. Here in Hawaii, it's always 80 degrees. So I can't.
It was 32 degrees this morning when I woke up.
But there's other things, other benefits, of being here or there.
Right. So thank you.
You just got to go with that. But let's so I'll be in contact with you this week or whatever. I'll text you, and we will see about connecting another time, whether it's something you can do next week or if we need to do it later, let's do that. But
that sounds great.
If we can get a regular thing going, we can get all of our knowledge out there and hopefully help get other people excited about stringing and about tennis and just the industry and stuff, right?
Awesome. Yeah, I enjoyed talking to you. So thanks, Patrick. I appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Brad. And so we'll be talking soon, and have a good rest of the weekend.
All right. You too. Thanks.
All right, bye.